The perfect cup of coffee is not a myth. It's a science, an art, a daily devotional. For me, it was the entire point of early retirement. At 38, I had successfully navigated the shark-infested waters of the tech industry, managed a team of brilliant but socially feral coders, and cashed out my stock options at the exact right moment. The reward for a decade of 15-hour days spent arguing about server uptime and user interface paradigms was this: a quiet house in a quiet suburb where the loudest sound was supposed to be my own grinding of single-origin Ethiopian beans. The house was my project. A sprawling, slightly dilapidated single-story home that used to be a municipal utility annex back in the 50s. It had weirdly thick walls, a basement that could double as a fallout shelter, and a deed that came with a mountain of arcane blueprints. I got it for a song precisely because it was weird, and I loved it for the same reason. My plan was simple: drink coffee, tinker with the house, and blissfully ignore the human race for the foreseeable future. This particular Tuesday morning, the plan was working perfectly. A warm shaft of sunlight cut through the kitchen window, illuminating the swirling steam from my mug. The coffee had notes of blueberry and jasmine, or so the bag claimed. To me, it just tasted like freedom. Outside, the Harmony Creek Estate subdivision was living up to its name, a tableau of unnerving tidiness. Lawns were clipped to a uniform height, cars were parked at precise angles in their driveways, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of impeccably pruned maple trees. It was the kind of peace you see in movies, right before the aliens land. I took a long, satisfying sip. This was it. The summit? The nirvana of not having to attend a 9 a.m. stand-up meeting. Then my phone rang, shattering the sacred silence. It was Sarah Jenkins, my neighbor from 2 doors down. Sarah was a corporate lawyer with a wit as sharp as my own, which made her one of the 2 people in this entire subdivision I could tolerate. The other was Gus, the contractor I was still vetting, and that was mostly because he grunted instead of talking. "Leo, are you seeing this?" Sarah's voice was a frantic staccato, stripped of its usual ironic drawl. I glanced out the window. Seeing what? The soul-crushing conformity of suburban life? Yeah, I see it every morning. It's like a horror film directed by Pottery Barn. "No, the hospital. I'm here volunteering. The water's out, completely off, in the new pediatric wing." I frowned. St. Jude's Children's Hospital was my only neighbor to the west, a sprawling campus of brick and glass. The new West Wing, a state-of-the-art pediatric oncology unit, shared a long property line with my backyard. "A main break, probably," I said, already dismissing it. City infrastructure was notoriously fragile. "I don't think so, Leo. My own sprinkler system is running," I added, pointing my mug toward the rhythmic spray of water arcing across my lawn. "It's got to be an internal issue with their plumbing." "It's not," she insisted, her voice tight with stress. "The facilities manager is freaking out. He said the pressure dropped to 0 in an instant. The city says the mains are fine. And, Leo, the staff saw Carol Blackwell near the main shutoff valve about 20 minutes ago." A cold dread seeped into my coffee-warmed bliss. Carol Blackwell, the president, chairman, and supreme leader of the Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association. In the 2 months since I'd moved in, I had received 3 official violation notices from her. The first was for a welcome mat that featured a picture of a cat. Apparently, it was of a non-standard, whimsical design that detracted from the neighborhood's serious architectural character. The second was for having an Amazon package on my porch for more than 2 hours, a potential vector for property clutter. The third was because the moving van had left a tire tread mark on the curb. Carol was a woman who weaponized beige. She patrolled the streets in a golf cart, a clipboard permanently affixed to her hand, her eyes scanning for any blade of grass that dared to dream of being a millimeter taller than its peers. She was a petty tyrant in a pastel visor, and the main water valve for the hospital sat on a disputed easement, a strip of land right between my property and the hospital's access road. My blood ran cold. "No," I whispered. "She wouldn't." She would. Sarah's voice was grim. You know she would. They just put up that big, colorful mural on the new wing's exterior wall. Carol called it an assault on the senses at the last HOA meeting. I put my coffee down. The perfect cup suddenly tasted like ash. I looked out the window again, past my sprinklers, toward the edge of my property, and I saw it. A new addition to the landscape. A small, ridiculously ornate wrought iron fence, the kind you'd see around a tiny, pompous poodle's grave, freshly erected around the big, blue industrial shutoff valve. And standing beside it, radiating a smugness so powerful it could probably be detected from space, was Carol Blackwell. I didn't bother with shoes. The dewy grass was cold under my bare feet as I stormed across my lawn, a man on a holy mission. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was staggering. It was like watching someone try to put a parking boot on a nuclear submarine. Carol didn't flinch as I approached. She just made a little tick mark on her clipboard. Her blonde bob was engineered to withstand a hurricane, and her pink polo shirt was tucked so tightly into her white capri pants it looked like a single, seamless garment. "Carol," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "What did you do?" She finally looked up from her clipboard, her eyes gliding over me with the detached appraisal of a scientist studying a mildly interesting fungus. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell. I trust you received the notice about maintaining lawn height to a uniform 3 inches? We're striving for a harmonious aesthetic here in Harmony Creek." "Forget my lawn," I snapped, pointing a trembling finger at the valve. "The water, in the hospital. Turn it back on, now." A thin, self-satisfied smile touched her lips. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The hospital has been non-compliant. As you know, any new construction or significant aesthetic modification visible from the Harmony Creek Estate's common areas must be submitted for board approval. They constructed their new wing, complete with that garish mural, without so much as a courtesy notification. It's a children's hospital, not a new deck. They don't answer to your garden club. Furthermore," she continued, completely ignoring me, "they have failed to pay the Harmony Creek Estate's utility access fee, a fee that is clearly outlined in Appendix C, subsection 4 of our bylaws for any non-residential entity benefiting from infrastructure located on HOA property." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the layers of weaponized pettiness. "You invented that fee an hour ago, didn't you? You printed it out at your little craft station and stuck it in your binder. Rules are rules," she said, tapping the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. A small, laminated sign was zip-tied to her new fence. It read, "HOA Common Area. No unauthorized access," in a severe, joyless font. "Once the compliance fee is paid and the board approves their tacky mural, water access can be revisited. Until then, the valve remains closed." "There are sick kids in there, you absolute goblin!" I finally roared, the last of my composure shredding. "Kids with cancer! They need sterile water, they need sanitation. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She had the gall to look offended. "I am simply protecting the property values and aesthetic integrity of this community, Mr. Maxwell. Perhaps if the hospital administration had shown a little more respect for our regulations, this unfortunate situation could have been avoided." She was a black hole of empathy, an abyss of reason. Arguing with her was like trying to teach quantum physics to a toaster. She had a single, all-powerful belief. The HOA bylaws, as interpreted by her, were the highest law of the land, superseding city ordinances, common decency, and basic human morality. And in her tiny, manicured kingdom, she was queen. As Carol continued her monologue about visual harmony and regulatory oversight, my rage began to cool, replaced by a frantic, buzzing energy. My eyes drifted away from her and her stupid fence, past the impotent blue valve, and back toward my own house. The blueprints. The words of the old city engineer who sold me the place echoed in my head. "This place has history," he'd said, his voice raspy as he pointed out odd fixtures in the basement. "Built to last. Lots of redundancies from the Cold War days. City wanted to make sure the hospital could function no matter what. Most of it's disconnected now, but the bones are good. Redundancies, a bypass, an emergency system. The idea hit me with the force of a lightning strike. I turned my back on Carol mid-sentence. I think she was saying something about unapproved wind chimes, but it didn't matter. I broke into a dead sprint, my bare feet pounding against the grass. "Mr. Maxwell, we are not finished with this conversation!" she shrieked after me. I ignored her. I was a man possessed by a single, desperate thought. The blueprints, which I had initially dismissed as a nerdy curiosity, were now the most important documents in the world. I didn't need to look at them, though. The image was burned into my memory from a late night of obsessive study when I first moved in. I crashed through my back door, skidded on the kitchen tile, and threw open the door to the basement. I took the steep wooden stairs 2 at a time, landing in the cool, musty air below. The basement was my kingdom of chaos. Half-unpacked boxes of old computer parts, shelves of tools, my disassembled server rack from my old life. Behind a stack of paint cans and a forlorn-looking treadmill, I found it, just like in the blueprints. It was a monument to mid-century over-engineering. A massive cast-iron lever, as thick as my arm, and painted a faded fire engine red, was set into a monolithic block of concrete. It looked like something you'd use to launch a missile or flood a dry dock. Above it, a metal plate was bolted to the cinder block wall, its stenciled letters faint but legible. St. Jude. S. Hospital. Auxiliary pump engage. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it, the failsafe, the ghost in the machine. I grabbed the lever with both hands. It was cold, solid, and utterly immobile. I pulled. Nothing. It was seized by 60 years of disuse. I grunted, planted my feet, and threw my entire body weight into it. My IT-softened muscles screamed in protest. For a terrifying second, I thought it was hopeless. "Come on, you magnificent rust bucket!" I gave one last, desperate heave, a roar of frustration and adrenaline tearing from my throat. With a sound like a giant cracking his knuckles, the lever broke free. It moved, groaning in protest, on a cascade of rust and ancient grease. I pushed it all the way down until it locked into place with a deafening, final clang that echoed through the entire house. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a deep, subterranean rumble started, vibrating up through the concrete floor. It was the sound of something immense waking from a long slumber. The rumble grew into the powerful, steady hum of a massive electric motor kicking to life. I could hear the roar of water surging through pipes that had likely been dry since the Kennedy administration. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sarah. I fumbled to answer it, my hands shaking, my lungs burning. "Oh my God, Leo, it's back on!" she yelled, her voice a mix of shock and elation. "The water is back on! The pressure is climbing! How did you do that?" I leaned against the cool cinder block wall, panting, a wild grin spreading across my face. "I engaged in some aggressive, unlicensed plumbing," I managed to get out. "Tell the hospital they're running on the backup. I have no idea how long it'll hold." I hung up and looked at my hands. They were covered in rust and grime. My quiet life was officially over. I had just declared war on a homeowners association, and I desperately needed another cup of coffee. 30 minutes. That's how long my victory lasted. 30 minutes of pacing my kitchen high on adrenaline and caffeine before the inevitable flashing lights painted my living room walls blue and red. I peeked through the blinds to see a police cruiser parked at my curb. Of course. Carol Blackwell, I was learning, moved with the vindictive speed of a kicked hornet's nest. On my front lawn, a tableau of suburban justice was unfolding. Carol stood on the sidewalk, gesturing with her entire body towards my house, as if it were an active volcano. 2 officers stood listening, or at least pretending to. One was a kid, Officer Davis, with fresh-faced earnestness and a uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut you. The other, Officer Miller, was his polar opposite. He was a man in his late 50s with the weary, 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen every stupid thing humanity was capable of, and was profoundly disappointed by all of it. I took a deep breath, slipped on a pair of flip-flops, and walked outside to face the music. "Sir, are you Mr. Maxwell?" Officer Davis asked, his hand hovering near his belt in a way that was probably meant to be authoritative but just looked nervous. "We received a report of illegal tampering with municipal water infrastructure." "That's a lot of syllables for what I did," I said, leaning against my doorframe. "Let me guess. The report came from a woman who communicates exclusively through laminated notes and believes a tacky welcome mat is a Class A felony?" I nodded towards Carol, who was now glaring at me with the focused hatred of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "He's a menace," Carol declared to the officers. "He has activated some sort of rogue infrastructure. It's unregulated. It could be contaminating the water supply. He is endangering the entire community." Officer Miller, who had been studying a crack in the sidewalk with intense interest, finally sighed. The sound contained multitudes of paperwork, of pointless disputes, of long nights and bad coffee. He turned to me. "You got paperwork for this pump thing?" he asked, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "I've got a stack of city blueprints from 1962 that look like the Dead Sea Scrolls," I replied. "They're pretty cool if you're into mid-century civil engineering. Lots of technical drawings, historical notations. You want to see them? I can make a pot of coffee." Miller's left eye twitched. "Just tell me what happened, son. In 20 words or less." "She shut off water to a children's hospital," I said, pointing at Carol. "I turned on the emergency backup, which is located entirely on my property, using a system designed and built by the city for this exact purpose. The hospital has water again. The end." Davis looked confused, flipping through his little notebook. "But the complainant states that the primary valve is on HOA common property. The complainant also states that my mailbox, which is beige, creates visual disharmony with the neighborhood's beige houses. Her grip on reality is, let's say, tenuous," I explained. "This is a woman who would write a ticket to a cloud for unauthorized loitering." Miller finally looked directly at Carol. "Ma'am, did you, in fact, shut off the water valve that services the hospital?" "I was enforcing our community bylaws," she insisted. "It is my fiduciary duty as HOA president." Miller rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture of a man in deep spiritual pain. He turned back to me, then to Davis. "This is a civil matter," he said, the finality in his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about property lines and old agreements and bylaws." He said the word bylaws like it was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "We can't arrest him for turning on a pipe on his own property that is helping a hospital you admit you cut off." "This is an outrage," Carol sputtered. "I am the president of this HOA." "I'll be sure to put that in my report," Miller said, his face a perfect mask of bureaucratic indifference. "Have a nice day, ma'am." He gestured for Davis to head back to the car. As they walked away, Miller slowed his pace to fall in line with me. He lowered his voice. "Look, kid, you seem like you got your head on straight, but you've kicked a hornet's nest. That woman," he nodded back at the fuming Carol, "is a professional pain in the neck. I've been on 3 other calls involving her this year. One was about a squirrel. This isn't over. My advice? Don't touch her valve, and don't let her touch your lever. Get a lawyer." "Already got one on speed dial," I said. "Good," he grunted. "You're gonna need her." As the cruiser pulled away, I was left on my lawn, the victor of the first skirmish. But Miller's words echoed in my ears. This was just the beginning. I was fighting a woman who had the time, the inclination, and the perceived authority to make my life a living hell. My temporary solution wasn't going to cut it. I needed to build a moat. The next morning, I stood in my basement staring at the big red lever. It was my Excalibur, my only real weapon in this fight. But it was vulnerable. The pump it controlled was ancient, and the access points were all over my property. Carol was unhinged, and I had no doubt she'd eventually try something more direct than calling the cops. My grand, leisurely renovation plan had just been thrown out the window. Priority number 1 was now a military-grade infrastructure project. I went through the numbers I'd collected for local contractors. Most were slick companies with glossy websites and names like Prestige Home Solutions. I skipped right over them. I needed someone practical, Someone who wouldn't be scared off by a little suburban insanity. I stopped at a name I'd seen on a beat-up but well-maintained Ford F-150 in the neighborhood. Petrov's Practical Renovations. It sounded solid. No nonsense. I called the number. A gruff voice answered with a single word. Petrov? An hour later, Gus Petrov was standing in my driveway. He was a mountain of a man in his 40s, with a square jaw, a shaved head, and arms thick with muscle. He wore a faded work shirt and carried a battered metal clipboard. He radiated an aura of pure, undiluted competence. He followed me to the basement, his boots making heavy, decisive sounds on the stairs. I explained the situation, pointing out the pump, the pipes, the whole ridiculous setup. I then walked him through the yard, showing him where the main pipes ran underground. Gus listened to the entire story, the HOA, Carol, the hospital, the cops, with an intense, unreadable expression, occasionally nodding and making a note on his clipboard. So, I finished, standing in the backyard, I need you to build a secure, reinforced housing around the pump access in the basement. And out here, I'm thinking a low concrete wall, maybe 2 feet high, built directly over the pipeline. Something that says, don't even think about digging here. Basically, I want to make it impossible for anyone to mess with my water system without a mining drill and a search warrant. Gus was silent for a long time. He looked from me to Carol's house, then back to the plans I'd sketched out. A slow, wide smile spread across his face, transforming his tough exterior. So, he said, his voice a low rumble with a thick Eastern European accent. You want me to build a fortress? A pipe fortress? He paused, his smile growing wider. To fight the tiny angry lady with the clipboard. Pretty much, I admitted. And given the urgency, I'll pay double your usual rate for the rush job. Gus let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. This is the best job I have ever had, he declared, clapping me firmly on the shoulder. This is better than kitchen remodel, better than bathroom tile. This has purpose. He flipped to a clean page on his clipboard. We start tomorrow, 7 a.m. I bring my best guys. We will build you a fortress that will survive the apocalypse, or the HOA, whichever comes first. In that moment, I knew I had found more than a contractor. I had found my first soldier. While Gus and his crew began the excavations for what we'd officially dubbed the Fortress of Flow, Carol launched her inevitable counteroffensive. Unable to win the water battle directly, she fell back on the bureaucratic guerrilla warfare she knew best. My mailbox became a war zone. Each morning, nestled amongst the junk mail, I would find a crisp, new violation notice, neatly sealed in a plastic sleeve to protect it from the elements. It was a masterpiece of sustained, petty aggression. On Monday, I received a $50 fine for my grass being a 1/4 inch above the regulation 3-inch height. The notice included a blurry photo with a ruler held up to a blade of grass for evidence. On Tuesday, a $75 fine appeared. My garbage cans, which I had rolled out the night before, had allegedly been visible from the street for a full 65 minutes before the 6 a.m. cutoff time. The notice cited a violation of the pre-dawn refuse obscurity mandate. On Wednesday, I received a severe 2-page warning that the beige color of my mailbox trim was an unapproved shade. My beige, it seemed, was a warm, sandy tone, whereas the officially sanctioned HOA beige was a cooler, eggshell variant. My mailbox, Carol wrote, creates a jarring visual disharmony that undermines the cohesive aesthetic of the entire street. On Thursday, a $100 fine for a commercial vehicle being parked in my driveway for more than 4 hours. This was Gus's truck, a truck that was actively being used to improve my property, a project that was, ironically, all about bringing my home up to a more permanent, defensible standard. My first instinct was to ignore it all, but Sarah, my lawyer neighbor, advised against it. Don't ignore them, she said over the phone. It gives her an opening to put a lien on your house for unpaid fines. You have to respond. The key is how you respond. I decided to respond with malicious compliance. For the grass fine, I went out and bought a pair of tiny sewing scissors and very publicly spent an hour trimming the blades of grass near the sidewalk down to the exact height, while Carol watched from her window. For the garbage can fine, I programmed my smart home system to open my garage door at exactly 5:59 a.m. every trash day, have a small robotic arm push the cans to the curb, and then roll them back at 7:01 p.m. sharp. For the commercial vehicle fine, I had Gus park his truck on the street, which was public property and outside of Carol's jurisdiction. And for the mailbox, I went to the hardware store. I returned with a can of the most obnoxious, aggressive beige I could find. It was a dark, muddy, vaguely militaristic color. I spent a happy afternoon repainting not just the trim, but the entire mailbox. When I was done, I stenciled a small, neat label on the side. Model, Vengeful Taupe. The fines, however, still needed to be paid. So, on Friday, I went to the bank. I withdrew $225 in the most inconvenient currency imaginable. That afternoon, I walked over to Carol's house, up her pristine walkway, and placed 5 heavy cloth bank bags full of pennies on her welcome mat, which was, of course, the regulation shade of gray. I didn't ring the bell. I just left them there, a silent 500-penny monument to my defiance. As I walked away, I saw Gus watching from my driveway. He raised his hammer in a slow, respectful salute. The war of attrition was on, and I was starting to enjoy it way more than I should have. The problem is, she's not entirely wrong. We were at a coffee shop downtown, far from the oppressive beigeness of Harmony Creek. Sarah had a stack of documents spread out in front of her. Property maps, county records, and a thick 3-ring binder that contained the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, a document so dense and tedious it could be used as a sleep aid. "What do you mean she's not wrong?" I asked, nearly choking on my latte. "She's weaponizing the color wheel and holding sick kids hostage. That feels pretty wrong to me." "Legally wrong, Leo. I mean legally," Sarah clarified, pushing a map towards me. "Okay, so here's the mess. The original city plat from the 1950s, when this area was first developed, clearly shows a 15-foot-wide utility easement that runs right where Carol built her stupid fence. That part is in your favor. It's designated for city and utility access." "So, case closed," I said with relief. "Not so fast." She tapped the thick HOA binder. When the developer formed the HOA in the late 80s, the language they used in the founding charter was incredibly sloppy. It's a boilerplate document, and it vaguely incorporates all non-privatized land parcels, green spaces, and boundary territories as HOA common area, subject to board oversight. I stared at the 2 conflicting documents. So, who does it belong to? The city, the hospital, or the beige dictator? "Exactly," Sarah said, leaning back with a frustrated sigh. "Siderson. Both of you have a plausible but not airtight legal claim to have jurisdiction over that patch of grass. It's a legal gray area the size of the Grand Canyon. To get a definitive ruling, you'd have to go to court, file for a quiet title action, get official surveyors out there, dig up historical records. It would take a year and probably $50,000 in legal fees." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "She knows this, doesn't she?" "She absolutely knows this," Sarah confirmed. "Her husband is a retired real estate lawyer. They know every dirty trick in the book. She's banking on the fact that nobody, not you, not even the hospital, has the time, money, or energy to fight her on it. It's easier to just pay her stupid made-up fees and let her have her way." This changed everything. This wasn't just one crazy woman on a power trip anymore. This was a calculated, strategic abuse of a legal loophole. She had found a crack in the system and was using it to extort and control everyone around her. My fight wasn't just personal now. It felt like I was fighting the very concept of weaponized bureaucracy. "So what do we do?" I asked. Sarah took a sip of her tea. "We keep fighting the way you are now. Fortify your position on your own property, which is undisputed. And in the meantime, I'll keep digging. There's got to be something in the county records that's more definitive, something that predates the HOA charter. A master plan, an original deed transfer. Something. It's a needle in a haystack, but it might be in there. I left the coffee shop with a renewed sense of purpose. Carol thought she had found the perfect, unbreakable angle. She thought she could win by making the fight too expensive and too annoying to wage. She had severely underestimated how much coffee I could drink and how much I hated bullies. The morning air was usually filled with the scent of dew-covered grass and the distant hum of the highway. But that Wednesday, I woke up to a different sound. Gus Petrov, bellowing a string of what I could only assume were very creative and powerful curses in his native tongue. I threw on a pair of jeans and ran outside. The scene in my backyard was one of muddy devastation. The day before, Gus's crew had finished digging a long, deep trench, about 3 feet wide and 4 feet deep. It was a perfect, clean-cut slice in my yard, ready for them to lay reinforced concrete and extra shielding around the auxiliary water pipe that ran from the pump to the hospital property line. Now, it was a soupy, brown lake. I followed Gus's enraged gaze to the source of the flood. My property was separated from Carol's by a thin line of hedges. Peeking through those hedges, I could see her sprinkler heads, all 6 of them. And all 6 of them were aimed not at her own pristine lawn, but directly at my yard, firing jets of water into the trench. They'd clearly been running all night. This was no accident. This wasn't a petty fine or a nasty note. This was active, malicious, deliberate sabotage. She had intentionally flooded my construction site to delay the project and cost me money. "This is not an accident," Gus growled, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was covered in mud from a failed attempt to assess the damage. "She did this. This is bad. This will set us back 2 days, maybe 3. We must pump out mud, wait for ground to dry. This costs much money in drainage pumps and time." I looked from the muddy trench to Carol's house. A lace curtain in her upstairs window twitched. She was watching. I felt a cold, clean rage settle over me. The game had changed. The gloves were off. The beige rebellion was about to become a full-blown revolution. Word of the great trench flood of Harmony Creek spread through the neighborhood with the speed of gossip. It was a turning point. You could draw a clear line down our street now. On one side were the Carol fearers, people who now actively avoided my gaze and scurried inside when they saw me coming. On the other side was the resistance. That afternoon, I saw Mr. Henderson from 4 houses down, a meek, retired accountant, standing in his driveway with a can of spray paint. He was carefully repainting his mailbox in a shade that looked suspiciously like vengeful taupe. Later, the garish pink flamingo that had been the subject of a month-long dispute on the other end of the street mysteriously reappeared on its owner's lawn, this time wearing a tiny, hand-knitted beige sweater. A silent, coordinated rebellion was brewing, one petty act of defiance at a time. Carol had drawn her line in the mud, and people were finally starting to choose a side. The sabotage had one unintended consequence for Carol. It got the hospital's full attention. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was not a process server or a cop, but a woman in a smart blue suit, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "Mr. Maxwell, I'm Dr. Anya Sharma," she said, extending a hand. "I'm the chief administrator for the St. Jude's West Wing." I ushered her into my living room, which was still a chaotic landscape of unpacked boxes and Gus's construction plan spread over the coffee table. I hastily cleared a spot for her to sit. "I apologize for the mess," I said. "I'm in the middle of some aggressive home improvements." "So I've heard," she said with a small, wry smile. "Mr. Maxwell, Leo, I came here to thank you, personally, and on behalf of every patient, parent, and staff member at the hospital." She leaned forward, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal the intense stress she was under. "I don't think you fully understand what you did. When that water went out, it was a code red emergency. We were minutes away from having to evacuate 17 immunocompromised children. An evacuation like that is dangerous, complicated, and deeply traumatic for the kids and their families. Your aggressive, unlicensed plumbing. It wasn't just a convenience, it was a miracle. You prevented a catastrophe. I felt a flush of heat rise to my face. I just flipped a switch, I mumbled, suddenly feeling awkward. And hired a guy who's very good at building walls. You stood up to a bully when no one else would, she corrected gently. We've been dealing with Miss Blackwell's complaints for months. We tried to reason with her, but it was like talking to a brick wall. A very well-regulated brick wall. We knew fighting her legally would be a long, slow battle. You've given us the time we need to fight it properly. She placed a business card on the table. Our legal department is now fully engaged. They've been digging into the county records, just as your neighbor suggested. They have resources and connections that can speed things up. They are, as of this morning, at your complete disposal. Consider them your lawyers, too. Whatever you need, advice, research, representation, it's yours. The hospital is in your debt, Leo. We will not let you fight this alone. Her words landed with a weight I hadn't expected. This whole affair had started as an absurd, almost comical feud over my property. But sitting there, listening to Dr. Sharma, the reality of the stakes hit me hard. This wasn't about mailboxes or lawn height anymore. It was about those 17 kids. My motivation, which had been a cocktail of spite, principle, and sheer stubbornness, was now purified. It was simple. Carol could not be allowed to win. Not now. Not ever. The text from Sarah came in at 8:17 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich, while Gus's crew packed up their tools for the day. The Fortress of Flow was nearly complete, a formidable-looking structure of concrete and rebar that now encased the vital pipes in my backyard. Sarah's text was a single, frantic line. Carol called an emergency board meeting. 8 p.m., clubhouse. I'm here. It's bad. My stomach dropped. An emergency meeting was Carol's nuclear option. It required a 24-hour notice unless there was a perceived imminent threat to the community. A second text came through. She's declaring your pump system a public hazard, citing unregulated modifications and liability risks. A third, a minute later, was a photo of a document Carol was distributing. It was a formal motion. My blood ran cold as I read the blurry text. She was proposing that the HOA hire its own contractor to forcibly enter my property and safely decommission the hazardous, non-compliant auxiliary pump system. She was planning a full frontal assault. I called Sarah immediately. Can she do that? Legally. It's beyond shaky, Sarah whispered from the back of the meeting room. But she's framing it as an emergency. She's got the other two board members, Henderson and Clark, completely terrified. She's telling them the HOA will be sued into oblivion if your ancient pump explodes and floods the neighborhood or something. I could hear Carol's shrill, commanding voice in the background, spewing nonsense about insurance liability and uncertified machinery. She was a master of sowing fear and uncertainty. Henderson and Clark were spineless retirees who just wanted to protect their property values. They were no match for her. The final text from Sarah was the death blow. They voted. It passed. 3-0. She's got her own contractor lined up. They're scheduled to be at your house at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The sandwich in my hand suddenly felt like a lead weight. I had less than 12 hours. The war of attrition was over. The final siege was about to begin. I ran outside. Gus and his two-man crew, a pair of quiet, hard-working guys named Mikhail and Stefan, were loading the last of their tools into the truck. "Change of plans," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "She's coming. Tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. with her own crew to rip it all out." Gus stared at me, his face grim in the twilight. He looked at the half-finished concrete forms, the exposed rebar, the vulnerable-looking access panel to the pump's main circuitry. "How much work is left?" I asked, my heart pounding. "To finish? To make it strong? 8-10 hours," Gus said, wiping his hands on a rag. "We need to finish the rebar grid, pour the final layer of high-strength concrete, and weld the steel access plate shut. The concrete needs time to set. Even with accelerant, it will be soft in the morning." "We don't have time," I said. "We have tonight." Gus looked at his men. They looked back at him, then at me. A silent conversation passed between them. It was a crazy request. An all-nighter, doing heavy construction work under portable floodlights, racing against an insane deadline. Mikhail, the taller of the two, shrugged and said something in Russian. Gus translated with a grim smile. He says, "The pay is good and the cause is just." Stefan agrees. "Okay, Leo, we do this. But you are buying pizza. And much, much coffee." What followed was the most frantic, surreal, and exhausting night of my life. The backyard was transformed into a bizarre, high-stakes construction site. I ran extension cords and set up every portable floodlight I owned, bathing the yard in a harsh, artificial glare. The concrete mixer, which should have been silent for the night, roared back to life. I became the crew's gopher. I made endless pots of coffee. I ordered a mountain of pizzas and a case of energy drinks that probably violated the Geneva Conventions. I held flashlights, mixed concrete, and tried to stay out of the way as the three professionals worked with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking to watch. We worked through the night, a small, sleep-deprived army fighting a ridiculous, desperate battle. The neighborhood was dark and silent around us, save for the hum of the mixer and the clang of steel on steel. We spoke in low, urgent tones, a mixture of English and Russian. Gus, ever the pragmatist, was in his element. He improvised a solution to a misaligned housing using a car jack and a 2x4. He directed his men with a series of grunts and hand signals. Around 3 a.m., as we were troweling the final layer of concrete, Mikhail paused, leaned on his shovel, and looked at the formidable structure we had built. It was a solid, brutalist block of concrete and steel, ugly and beautiful at the same time. He grinned. "Krepost Potoka," he said. Gus laughed. "The Fortress of Flow. I like it." The name stuck. By 6 a.m., as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, we were done. The final steel plate was welded over the main access panel. The concrete was poured, smoothed, and curing. It was still soft, but it was in place. We stood back, exhausted, filthy, and covered in concrete dust, admiring our work. It wasn't pretty, but it was a fortress. Now, all we could do was wait. At 7:45 a.m., the enemy arrived. A large, clean-looking truck from A1 Demolition and Removal pulled up across the street. A smarmy-looking man in a clean polo shirt got out and began conferring with Carol, who was standing on the sidewalk looking rested, triumphant, and utterly smug. She held a clipboard with a single, official-looking work order on it. Moments later, a police cruiser rolled up. My heart sank, but then I saw who was inside: Miller and Davis. Miller got out of the car, looking even more tired than usual, as if my personal suburban drama was the sole cause of his chronic sleep deprivation. I was waiting for them on my front lawn. Gus, Mikhail, and Stefan stood behind me, a silent, imposing wall of Slavic muscle. We were all running on fumes and sheer stubbornness. We probably looked like a group of very tired, very dirty cult members. The air was thick with tension. Neighbors were peeking out from behind their curtains. This was it, the final showdown. Carol and her contractor, followed by the two officers, marched across the lawn and stopped a few feet from us. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell," Carol said, her voice dripping with false pleasantry. "As per the HOA board's unanimous decision, we are here to decommission the unauthorized and hazardous structure on your property. Please step aside and allow these gentlemen to do their work." "Morning, Carol," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Slept well?" I didn't. Was a bit busy protecting a hospital's water supply from a petty tyrant. "You're not touching my property." "I have every legal right," she said, waving the work order in my face. "This is an official action sanctioned by the board. Officer, he is obstructing." Officer Davis, ever the rookie, took a step forward. "Sir, they do have a work order," he began, looking uncertainly from the paper to the fortress in my backyard. Officer Miller put a hand on his partner's arm, stopping him. He was looking at Gus and his crew, then at me. He muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "It's a piece of paper from the garden club. This is giving me a headache." He knew this was a civil matter, but Carol's official-looking document put him in a bind. His job was to keep the peace, not to interpret HOA bylaws. For a moment, it looked like we were at an impasse. Just as Carol's contractor took a step forward and gestured for his crew to start unloading a backhoe, a silver sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. The driver's door flew open, and Sarah Jenkins got out, her lawyerly composure completely gone. She was clutching a large, rolled-up tube of paper like it was a holy scepter. "Stop!" she yelled, running across the lawn, her heels sinking into the grass. "Everybody stop! Carol, you are about to commit a felony." Carol scoffed. "Nonsense! I am acting on the legal authority of the Homeowners Association. You're acting on behalf of your ego, and it's about to get you sued into the Stone Age," Sarah shot back, breathless. "I've been at the county records office since they opened this morning. Dr. Sharma had the hospital's top paralegal meet me there. They pulled every string they had, and we found it." She arrived at our standoff and unrolled the document on the hood of Officer Miller's cruiser. It wasn't a modern printout. It was a large, crackling piece of architectural paper, a high-quality scan of a document that was clearly ancient. The ink was faded, the lines drawn by hand. It was the original hand-drawn 1957 master plat for the entire Harmony Creek development. It predated the HOA by 25 years. "This," Sarah said, her voice ringing with triumph, "is the foundational document for every piece of property on this street, and it's a whole lot clearer than your sloppy HOA charter." Her finger traced a line on the old map. "Here's the easement, just as we thought. But look at this notation." She pointed to a block of small, spidery text in the corner, a detailed addendum from the City Planning Commission. She read it aloud. "The 15-foot municipal utility right-of-way adjacent to Lot 7, that's your lot, Leo, is to be perpetually maintained for city access. Furthermore, due to its prior function as a municipal utility annex, Lot 7 is hereby deeded permanent, irrevocable, and overriding emergency access rights to said right-of-way for the maintenance and operation of the St. Jude's Hospital Auxiliary Water System." She looked up, first at me, then at Carol, her eyes blazing. "Your HOA bylaws are irrelevant. This document supersedes them. It's part of the original deed record for this entire area. You have no more legal right to touch that valve, or anything on Leo's property connected to it, than you do to repaint the White House." A profound, beautiful silence descended upon the lawn. The first to break it was Carol's contractor. He leaned over the car hood, squinted at the ancient document, and read the passage for himself. He looked at the official county seal on the scan. He looked at Carol's face, which was rapidly draining of all color. He straightened up, took a step back, and whistled for his crew. "Nope," he said, shaking his head. "Not touching that. Pack it up, boys. You can send my invoice for the call-out," he added to Carol, before turning and walking back to his truck without a backward glance. Carol stood frozen for a moment, her mouth opening and closing silently. She went through the 5 stages of grief in about 10 seconds, bypassing bargaining and depression and landing squarely on a towering volcanic rage. "This is a trick!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "A forgery! You conspired against me. The hospital bribed someone. This is a criminal conspiracy." She pointed a shaking finger at me, at Sarah, at the sky. She was unraveling in real time, her entire world of petty rules and absolute power crumbling around her. And that's when Officer Miller, who had been watching the entire scene with a look of slow, dawning relief, finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He stepped forward, his weariness replaced by a newfound energy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "that's enough. For the past 2 months, you have knowingly filed false police reports. You have harassed this man. You have vandalized his property, and you have, most seriously, deliberately interfered with a critical service to a children's hospital. Now you're making baseless accusations in front of a police officer. You and I are going to have a long, long talk about all of that. But first, you're going to get off this property. Now." Carol stared at him, her jaw slack. The finality in his tone, the sheer weight of his authority, an authority far greater than her own, finally broke through. The fight went out of her. She looked small, deflated, and utterly, comprehensively defeated. She sputtered one last incoherent word, turned, and scurried back across the lawn to the safety of her beige house. The war was over, and against all odds, we had won. The next day, my house was the most popular spot on the block. A van from the local news station was parked at the curb, a reporter with impossibly white teeth trying to get a soundbite from me. I stood on my porch, holding a mug of coffee, feeling deeply uncomfortable with the attention. "So, Mr. Maxwell, you're being hailed as a local hero," the reporter said, shoving a microphone in my face. "How does it feel?" "Honestly," I said, taking a sip, "I feel like I need a nap. And a new welcome mat. I just wanted to fix up my house. Turns out I had to overthrow a suburban government first. It's been a weird week. I'd advise checking local bylaws and pre-HOA master plats before you buy, folks. It can save you a lot of trouble." Just then, Dr. Sharma arrived. She gracefully stepped in front of the camera, saving me from having to answer any more questions. She gave a calm, eloquent statement, publicly thanking me, Gus, and Sarah for our help, and explaining how the community had come together to protect the hospital's most vulnerable patients. She made me sound far more noble and far less sarcastic than I actually was. I stood in the background, trying to look heroic, and not like a guy who hadn't slept in 36 hours. A week later, another emergency HOA meeting was called. This time, however, it wasn't called by Carol. It was called by the residents. The community clubhouse, usually a sterile, empty space, was packed to the rafters. I stood in the back with Sarah and Gus, who had insisted on coming to see the end of the story. Carol wasn't there. According to neighborhood gossip, she hadn't left her house in days. The meeting was short and decisive. Mr. Henderson, the meek accountant who had been one of the first to join the Beige Rebellion, stood up and called for a vote of no confidence in Carol Blackwell's presidency. The vote was swift and unanimous. She was out. Then, in a move that elevated the proceedings from a simple coup to a moment of pure comedic poetry, Mr. Henderson tabled a new motion. "I move," he announced, his voice trembling slightly with newfound courage, "that all fines levied by the previous board in the last 90 days be retroactively voided. And furthermore, I move that the official approved accent color for mailboxes in the Harmony Creek Estates be changed from eggshell beige to vengeful taupe." The room erupted in applause and laughter. The motion passed with a thunderous roar. The Beige Rebellion had won, and it had become law. A few days after that, Gus and I were sitting in lawn chairs in my backyard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the finished fortress of Flow. It was, without a doubt, the most over-engineered and beautiful concrete structure in the entire subdivision. We were sharing a beer in comfortable silence, two weary veterans surveying our handiwork. "The bill," Gus said, handing me a folded piece of paper. I braced myself. An all-night emergency job, rush fees, extra materials. It was going to be astronomical. I unfolded it slowly. My eyes scanned the numbers. It was high, but it was at least 30% less than I had expected. I looked at him confused. "This is less than I thought." Gus took a long drink from his beer. "I charge you for concrete. I charge you for labor. I charge for my men's time," he said, ticking the items off on his fingers. "But I take away charge for watching Crazy Lady have public meltdown. This is good entertainment, better than television. Call it a story discount." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Gus, you're a poet." "No," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips. "I am a practical man." And that was a practical pleasure. We clinked our bottles together, a silent toast to a job well done, and a victory well earned. A month after the showdown, my backyard was once again full of people. But this time it wasn't for a siege, it was for a celebration. I was co-hosting a community BBQ with the hospital. The Fortress of Flow was decorated with fairy lights, and the air was filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter. Neighbors who had scurried away from me a few weeks ago were now slapping me on the back and handing me beers. Mr. Henderson was proudly showing off pictures of his newly painted mailbox. Even Officer Miller had shown up, off duty, and in a Hawaiian shirt, a quiet smile on his face. The guests of honor were a group of kids from the pediatric wing, accompanied by their parents and Dr. Sharma. They were bright, energetic, and full of life. They presented me with a huge hand-painted cardboard trophy that read, in sparkling glitter letters, "World's Best Plumber." It was the greatest award I had ever received. Later, Sarah found me as I was looking out over the party. "Heard the latest?" she asked, handing me a fresh bottle of beer. "The for sale sign went up on Carol's lawn this morning. Movers were there all afternoon. She's gone. Vanished. Word is they moved to another state, presumably to find another, less fortified HOA to terrorize." I looked over at Carol's dark, empty house, and I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt relief. I stood on my deck, leaning against the railing, the trophy propped up beside me. I looked at the crowd in my yard. Gus arguing playfully with Mikhail, Sarah chatting with Dr. Sharma, a group of kids chasing a runaway balloon. This was the exact opposite of what I'd wanted when I moved here. I had come seeking isolation, a quiet fortress to hide from the world. Instead, I had built a literal fortress and, in the process, found myself at the center of a chaotic, vibrant, and fiercely loyal community. I realized the quiet I had been seeking wasn't silence, it was peace, and the sterile, enforced silence of Carol's regime had been anything but peaceful. This noisy, messy, wonderful chaos felt more like peace than anything I had ever known. I took a long, slow sip of my beer and smiled. For the first time, in the most unexpected of ways, I was finally completely home.